Hello, thank you and welcome to today's webinar on the next generation in grid cybersecurity and vulnerability assessment and compliance. I'm John Dirkman, Vice President of Product Management with Resource Innovations, formerly Nexent, and I'm proud to be joined by my colleague Jay Gignac from Artoria. Jay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, John. My name is Jay Gignac. I am Vice President of Sales at Artoria, and I'm excited to be partnered with Resource Innovations on such an exciting area as grid cybersecurity.
Thank you, Jay. Today, our webinar agenda is to start with an overview of Resource Innovations and Artoria's software and services, walk you through risk management, audit and compliance, looking at operational technology, professional services use cases, Grid360 and how it pertains to threat assessment, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So in terms of asking questions, you'll see in Zoom, at the side of your screen, you'll have a Q&A icon. If you click that, you'll open a window and you can type in questions. You can see the questions other people have submitted and you can upvote them. And that's helpful for us so the most important questions will filter to the top and we can answer those questions first. Okay, so Resource Innovations, we provide a combination of software and services. We do a lot of work with customer strategy and customer initiatives. Everything from portfolio and program planning, behavioral science, demand response, DER integration, and system economic studies, to deep dives into customer initiatives, designing programs, marketing, and customer engagement for better customer integration, program implementation and delivery, market ecosystem management, and regulatory compliance and reporting. We also have engineers providing grid modernization studies, generation, transmission, distribution, operations and expansion planning, looking at grid reliability and compliance, and grid modernization analysis, better ways to look at strategy and support for modernizing today's utility grid. These are all underpinned by our energy software platforms, Grid360, which I'll talk about today, for transmission, distribution, analytics, and optimization, iHedge for financial transmission rights analytics, and iEnergy, a tool for workflow modeling and customer engagement. And in doing demos and talking to clients, a lot of clients have expressed a concern over grid security, cybersecurity, how that's handled especially in this new age of ransomware attacks. So in searching the vendor landscape, we decide to partner with a premier provider of security, Artoria. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jay.
Thanks, John. So it's not uncommon to be speaking about this space and realize to a certain extent that our environments are extremely vulnerable. So in hearing feedback from end users as well as partners such as yourselves, we've come to understood that we have to find a way to make this more attainable as well as more visible, and certainly demystify a lot of the myths that surround cybersecurity for grids. There's a number of dynamics at play, such as distributed energy resources and the very fluid edge that's made things a little more difficult for utilities to own and manage that risk. So how Artoria contributes to a platform like Grid360 and Resource Innovations as a leading provider in this space is multifactorial. So we do provide full assessment capabilities, which can be executed in a continuous or punctual manner. We provide better enriched visibility into some of the existing initiatives that some of our end users or joint clients might have already started doing. We really bring a risk management platform to be able to own and manage the entire risk ecosystem, as well as multi-sources of information that would feed this platform, including obviously Grid360, which is very rich in information. And we focus on proactively providing discovery around the exposures that live in the environment and would be dormant until compromised or leveraged by a malicious actor. We're also very centric around providing good audit capabilities, such as audit prep, and meet compliance standards or assist the client in meeting compliance standards, such as NIST CSF, IEC 62443, or especially relevant for utilities in the Americas is NERC CIP. And based on all of the information that we're able to gather and incorporate from Grid360 as well as other sources, We provide deep integration into risk management platform or incident management platform that the end user might have. Integration into their SOC, existing response and remediation steps and processes, and tool set. We also complete this offering with some service-driven engagements like penetration testing, red teaming, or incident response in the case of incidents. And partnered with our platform is an integrated secure remote access solution in order to be able to build zero trust modeling around accessing the environment in an easy to configure and manage way of providing visibility. Now, one of the areas that we want to focus on is the assessment components. We often find that depending on the maturity of the organization that we're partnered with, we'll find that they often don't have enough information about their environment. So we want to give them a certain amount of tool sets on how to achieve and obtain this information. Whether this is done through the SPOT platform, which is an on-demand punctual assessment tool set that provides the ability to assess an environment, a site, a specific DCS system, maybe prior its provision. So as a FAT process or a SAT process, depending on who you're working with and how integrated you are with your supply chain, you have the ability to do these types of assessments on demand at the format that best fits your business. Now, obviously, it's not limited to specific machines or systems, but you could assess a site or even a group of sites. The platform gives the ability to centralize the results of these assessments and makes it easy to work with, and runs automated check against, based on the data that it's able to gather from the environment, some automated checks against some controls specific to the standards that you would want to compare against or measure against. Now, what's interesting also is that the platform supports questionnaires that are based around these standards and gives you the ability to score not only the questionnaire, but also the automated data component, combine them together for a meaningful report against your posture and controls performance against these specific requirements or standards. The second part is to reproduce this assessment type, but instead of doing it in a punctual manner, it's to do it in a continuous fashion. So having the platform monitor the environment live in near real time, continuously surveilling and assessing all of the components as well as changes in the environment. Now, in a moment or two, I'll get into how we do this, and it's a pretty unique approach to customer environments and architecture. But what's important to remind ourselves here is that in order to provide that continuous measure, it does allow for no downtime in the sense that you have continuous monitoring of the environment and not a punctual analysis of the environment. So the use cases are quite different, and they integrate both equally well into people, process, and technology within the end user organization, and really is flexible in addressing how culturally these aspects need to be fulfilled. The final type of assessments that we do are really based around services, which are more traditional in their approach. We do like to leverage our tool set in order to deliver some of these assessments, such as risk assessments or posture assessments, supply chain assessments on specific sites, misconfigurations of the environment, segmentation issues, these kind of things, as well as provide advisory services around security architecture and review, recommendations, post-incident, postmortems, and so on and so on, but also have the ability to leverage some of the tools that we push forward, such as our Recon Global Attack Surface Mapping, which is partially tool-driven, partially service-driven, and provides very meaningful information in a very timely manner about the external viewpoint of the entity or the organization and how a threat actor would look at the organization as a target or as possible point to leverage a supply chain type attack. So let's get a little bit into Artorio's unique way of doing things. So Artoria was developed a few years ago with the mindset that one of the challenges that blue teams or defensive teams face today is they're left dealing with multiple tools in order to try to secure a critical infrastructure environment or a utility environment or any industrial organization. They're all cultural problems as well as technology problems that exist between IT and OT, and solving these has been work in progress. The unfortunate reality is that many of the things that affect OT today are cyber hygiene based. So one of the issues that we often encounter, for example, is policies around not having to change passwords in an environment. Not knowing really well who or what is within the environment and who has access to what. We often find issues where firewalls are misconfigured or the wrong policies are in place to cover the OT environment, or even worse, the OT environment is considered to be out of scope. So in order to solve this hygiene problem at the very foundational layer, what we want to do is we want to inform ourselves of the entire environment and the entire journey of an incident, from the point of entry to the point of delivery. In order to do this, I then need to become the bridge in understanding between what's happening in IT and how it informs to OT. And I need to understand the experience, the device, and the assets that exist on the OT side. These are two very different environments with very different business dynamics. But in terms of sharing data with a platform such as ourselves, they can inform us in a very meaningful manner as to what is the experience on the network today or the customer organization, and how events can flow through the environment and end up affecting OT. So we want to enrich our information with everything that touches the environment: firewalls, endpoint protection, network monitoring systems, either they are on the IT side, such as IPSs or next-gen firewall with IPS components, or on the OT side, where we would see IDSs that would be sniffing traffic and inspecting for events. Now, although these foundational pieces are good, they're mostly focused on reactive approach to the environment. They will get triggered, alerts will get generated, typically when an incident is discovered or there's malicious behavior. And although it's important to talk about IOCs or indicators of compromise and have the ability to react to threats or events as they occur, we want to try to move this as much as possible towards indicators of exposure. So proactively being able to inform on what risks, gaps, and surface of attack is present in the organization prior to these things becoming indicators of compromise. To further enhance this information, we'll need to go and talk to assets directly. Now, most of our discovery is done passively. We do have the ability to do what is called safe active querying, of talking to their devices in their own protocols and with such things as engineering commands in order for them to respond to us in a predictable fashion and mostly a safe fashion. It is important to remember that when dealing with OT, it's very similar to medicine. First, do no harm. You want to have zero disruption against the environment, and you want to make sure that you're not impacting anything. And that's the golden rule that we follow. So even when we're doing safe active querying, we're doing so in a way that it protects the environment and that there is no disruption that is caused. Now, the third aspect that we use to be able to talk to industrial components is really to integrate with them. And what I mean by that is the integration is done on our end. We're not touching any of the environments. We're not touching any OPC, DCS historian systems, software suites like Kepware or OSIsoft are all things that will digest as information because we have integrations that are built for them, including automation vendors, DCS vendors, and so on. And the great thing about the platform is that it is designed to be modular. So should I walk into an environment with an end user, do the discovery on their environment, and realize that the vendor mix or the generational mix of the products and software suites that they have that live in the industrial environment, I don't have an integration that's been built yet for them. Well, the research team will build the integration very easily due to the modular nature of the platform. So this could be considered to be the first step out of the three. The second step is we're going to compare this enriched asset inventory that we're going to create, and we're going to compare it to a number of different databases. First and foremost, we have our own research division, and we invest in researching unknown vulnerabilities, 0 days, and so on. And we'll keep applying that research against the asset inventory that we discover. But we're also going to bring both private and public partnerships around threat research, analysis, databases that are available out there, threat intelligence brokers, and so on. And we're going to aggregate all this information into our threat analytics platform. Now, this is the second layer, and this will start informing us about vulnerabilities, exposures that might exist in the environment that we can observe. And it would be based on the analysis, say, for example, of the routing or pathing or access lists, permissions, and so on and so on. Now, the final layer, which is unique to Artoria, is the application of a cyber digital twin. We will take the client environment and we reproduce it as a virtual model within the platform. Now, this gives us a lot of flexibility because we can go and do breach and attack simulations against the client environment in this virtual model without affecting the real world environment and therefore not causing cyberkinetic events. So the advantage here in being able to manipulate this environment and to attack it is to find the hard to reach exposures, to make sure that we're testing everything that we're seeing in order to ensure that there is as little room for error as possible. And we want to minimize completely, if possible, any false positives or anything that we might see in the environment. Now, this model is highly sophisticated. It is a closed environment at this time, but it does allow us to test in a safe manner and make sure that this virtual model will serve the purpose of acting as a proving ground to ensure that we find all risks and threats and vulnerabilities in the environment. Once we have the combination of these three layers, we then start sharing this information. A great example of this is how not only do we use Grid360 as a data source for a lot of very meaningful information of what's happening within the operational environment, but we also share information back to Grid360. And we're going to touch a little later on in the presentation as to what kind of information we'd be sharing, where it would show up, and why it would be meaningful to the operators in those circumstances. Now, one of the final outputs, if I can put it this way, out of the platform is going to be able to share this information in a meaningful way at the different layers that the organization might need, whether that's informing the SOC, whether it's providing OT context to the rest of the business, whether it's providing compliance reports to the compliance and audit teams, and so on and so on. But one of the most meaningful outputs is really the contextualized real live environment playbooks that will emerge. So I am not modeling against the industry. I am not modeling against peers. I'm modeling against the environment itself. So that if we provide playbooks, remediation playbooks, we're providing them in a way that they're contextual to the real environment that we're monitoring, and not some assumptions based on the type of assets that could be present in the environment. We also want to do risk and impact analysis against not only the asset types, but their real role and their relationship to other assets within the environment. And this leads us to be able to provide multiple categories of risk, from safety risk to financial risk to operational risk, and so on and so on. We have different categories that are completely configurable from the end user, and we typically assist them in designing and configuring the platform to reflect their reality as well as their own understanding of their environment. Now, as we dive into some of the ways that we do this, the platforms themselves are all thought of in being able to be done from a central location. Gone are the days of reproducing traditional deployments of having to put heavy compute-intensive hardware in all locations. We leverage an edge architecture where we have a centralized device or server that will aggregate the information, and this information will be collected through the integrations that we have to the multiple technology ecosystems that exist in the client organization, but also being able to ingest data that is parsed and prepared by our edge appliances or edge devices that would be strategically located within the client architecture. Now, these devices will parse data. They're very efficient at extracting what is required, and they would pass this back up to the central location that could sit, at the operations center or the data center. Typically, these are good locations, and we would analyze the data from all these multiple data sources. This applies both to our continuous model as well as the assessment model. So I could even have portable devices that could be leveraged by an IT team or a technical team, and they could go around and doing these assessments in a plug and play fashion, deploying the device to the site, doing the collection of the environment and information, unplugging, uploading the information to the central server, and then moving on to another location. There's a lot of flexibility, and we don't necessarily have to be plugged into the environment. We could even do the assessment completely offline, where you would capture the right information from the environment and then import it into the solution. The offline assessment would get generated, and then that report would get consumed by the different stakeholders. Now, we do want to emphasize in Grid360, for example, some of the things that might be relevant for an asset owner or an asset operator, where we're going to show heat maps around risk. We're going to show problems around critically vulnerable assets, and so on and so on. So it's not just about being IT focused or security focused. There is a conversation there around providing information for the operational environment and the operators themselves, so that they understand the link between enterprise security and operational security and how it impacts them. Some example of common things that we find. So we find a lot of issues around the journey between IT and OT. So the conversation and the network experience there that we generally want to call hygiene-based problems. So I might have firewalls that are properly deployed, but they're misconfigured. I protect against that by being able to audit the firewall rules, access lists, configurations, logs, in order to be able to ingest and reply with the meaningful remediative actions. And it's going to be very detailed and very contextual to the environment. I want to see bridge networks. I want to see and have the ability to audit on connections to the environment. Not all connections are necessarily malicious. They could be based off negligence. They could be based off legacy connections to the environment. They could be workarounds. They could be rogue devices and so on. So I want to have the ability to understand properly what connections are to my environment and what connections are initiated from my environment to the outside world. So this is one of the key findings also that we would find on a regular basis. I've already talked about firewall issues, but we also informed around segmentation, make recommendations around segmentation, and this is all automated and based off the platform. We're going to see some host security issues, insecure protocols, plain text passwords being passed back and forth, and obviously we can report against specific assets, their vulnerabilities, the vulnerability types, why they're relevant if they are, and why they're not relevant if they're not. It's not because an asset has a vulnerability that necessarily translates to risk. It has it has a lot to do actually with where the asset is, what its role is, what's the access path, who is it talking to, and so on and so on. So we take into consideration the context of the asset, the firmware, the OS, the ecosystem it belongs to, and so on. So when I talk about proactively providing exposure discovery, is because I have this virtual model of the environment, I am able to go out and assess the environment and then start representing where these exposures lie. And this is very unique to Artoria because it combines both the ability of seeing more IOCs, reminding myself that the Artoria platform actually sees the entire holistic environment. It has the ability to provide IOCs from across everything it sees, not just the OT environment specifically, based on being located at a deeper layer of sensor that would only monitor what it can see. The Artoria platform sees everything. So when an incident occurs or an event is generated, it sees the entire event from cradle to grave. So it has a much better understanding of the context of this event and how it is being generated, what is it affecting, how is it pathing itself to OT, and so on and so on. Now, that gives me the ability, again, to provide indicators of exposure and providing the very detailed contextualized playbook in order to remediate these events. And in many cases, there is remediation that is possible with zero disruption to the environment. So we have capabilities like virtual patching, where you can immunize the defensive layer of the environment or the pathing layer of the environment to properly mitigate a risk. The risk would still exist in the environment, but it would have a mitigation applied against it, therefore protecting the asset. And it will continue to be tracked, obviously, in the platforms. One of the last things I would say on this topic is that capturing events is useful. Capturing the right events and presenting the information in the proper way is better. So if I'm able to analyze all of the events, and here we're talking about a site that was monitored with one of our clients, and that site was monitored over 2 weeks. And over that 2-week period, there was 4.5 million events. We had 11 integrations into the environment, including EDR solutions, firewall solutions, the industrial native solutions from the automation vendors, as well as the software suites that they provide, and a number of network components from very well-known vendors that exist out there. This was both OT switching as well as IT switching, as well as industrial routers. Now, all these data sources provided with all these events, and these events we were able to crystallize, if you will, in 358 indicators. Those indicators are the ones that I was showing on the previous slide, where 2/3 was exposures, 1/3 was about compromise. This is meaningful because I then have the ability to take these indicators and to group them into logical alerts. Many of these events will be related to each other. And having the ability to group these alerts together further allows me to group these alerts in a way that they will be tied to some of the same remediation steps, and therefore vastly improving the response time and the remediation time. And I can provide this information to the proper incident personnel in order for them to manage the incident in a very detailed manner, not only linking IT and OT together, but actually giving them a common conversation piece around the incident management steps. And this is the last layer of filtration, if you will, to get to the 26 insights. If I act upon the 26 insights or cases, these cases will resolve the upward chain of the alerts, the indicators, and the events. So this is only possible because of the correlation that occurs with the multiple data sources that we feed the system with, but also have the virtual environment of the cyber digital twin that allows us to modelize against the virtual environment. Combining these two things together makes for a very powerful platform. All right. So what does the platform also allow me to do? Well, it allows me to report in a very detailed fashion according to the automated controls and the questionnaire-based controls that I might have against some specific standards. Now, in this example here, we have site-level compliances. I could have process-level compliances. I could look, for example, at a specific substation or a generation unit and have the ability to isolate and look at this group of assets together that make for a logical grouping. Now, these assets will then allow me to report not only on the compliance standards, but perhaps multiple standards if they were all going to apply to that specific site. And I want to be able to track through time how the impact or the controls are. Now, depending on how I'm tracking the information, if I'm leveraging Spot to do the punctual assessment of the platform, I might be on a rotating assessment of every 3 months or every 6 months, dependent on the size of the organization and the requirements. I might have the continuous model where the platform is continuously monitoring the environment and able to provide in near real time the results of this analysis. And then I would have the specific standards, and we can't see it from this screen, but for each asset, I can go into the platform and look exactly at which compliance controls scored positively and specifically which ones contributed to the negative score. And this gives me a great degree of control. Now, this is very important because this is another area where having multiple sources of information, such as Active Directory, EDRs, firewalls, routing and pathing, all these things will contribute in their own way some meaningful pieces of information. I am not strictly dependent on looking at network layer monitoring. I'm ingesting multiple sources of information that will inform me on the specific compliance and controls. Finally, I want to spend some time talking a little bit about how we aggregate all this information and integrate to the client environment. We know that many utilities today will have their own SOC teams or their security operations center, as well as their own analysts. In order to consume this information, we need to make sure that we integrate not only from a technology perspective, but we fit into the activities that they're already performing. So whether we're ingesting context from Grid360s or other industrial sources, we're preparing this information to be parsed, enriched, and then distributed to the different layers that the organization might have. Whether that's a SIM product or a SOAR product, we want to be able to inform those products with the OT context, which is something that is very difficult to obtain today. Now, once we have this information transitioning over to the more traditional IT security side of the house, we want to inform them in a way that they're able to have a converged conversation with their respondents, as well as asset owners and operators, in order to properly understand what the issues are and have the proper information to perform these tasks. And then that allows them to distribute these tasks in both internally or externally, depending if they have outsourced vendors that are providing some of these deliveries within their security incident management ecosystem. We can also enhance those services. We do provide our own tier 3 and tier 4 response and accompaniment for the end users out there. I want to touch a little bit on the way that the architecture of the product is done. I've already spoken conceptually about all these layers, the bottom layers being the aggregation of the information. So I would interact with everything that exists in the environment, from protocols to network layers to Active Directory to remote access solutions to passive and active sensors that might exist in the environment. I will talk directly to the assets or ingest information from the assets directly. Network artifacts such as routing tables, NetFlow, and so on. I will consume project files or configuration files that might exist in the OT environment. I want to be able to ingest all the logs from all of the different assets or solutions that live and interact with OT in order to inform me with relevant information. If a platform or an asset does not yield useful information for protecting OT, then we don't need to integrate to it. And finally, the firewall or secure gateway layers that would be present in the environment. This is a very, very useful type of device or data source to integrate with. And then we would move this up. We would move it through the parsing engines that exist on the edge appliances or the edge devices. And then we would apply that in the correlated model, which is the dark blue box, where we apply the different threat models against the information that exists in the environment. This is also where we would do the virtual modeling and attack the environment in that virtual model in order to ensure that we're finding all relevant surface of attack against the environment, segmentation issues, configuration problem, and properly address whatever risks exist in the environment. So finally, we extract the information from this correlation layer, and we start generating what are called applications or outputs. And we would provide a very detailed asset inventory, much more detailed and enriched than traditional asset discovery tools out there, because we have, again, multi-source information that provides us to do a much better job in terms of identifying the asset and detailing it. We are meant to manage multiple sites, whether that's distribution utilities, transmission or generation. We specialize in all type of utility models out there. We also do behavioral anomalies as well as detection anomalies within the environment. So that's one of the layers that we would either serve ourselves or that we would leverage the integrations that we have to the environment to do so. In fact, we often integrate with multiple detection layers within the environment to provide even better detection and accuracy. We provide an extensive set of reports. I've already spoken around case management, which we call insights. We provide detailed attack surface analysis, vulnerability management, policy and compliance models, and mitigation playbooks, which then informs the different teams and solutions that might require this information as part of their own critical functions, from the ticketing systems to CMMS platforms, APM, the SIMs, the SOARs out there, the IT asset management platforms that are there to manage the aggregated enterprise landscape. This is an example of the number of different integrations that we have. It's impossible for us to list all of the integrations that we currently have in the system. It is meant to be an indication of the types of integrations that we have. We have our own proprietary technology and sensors that can be deployed in the environment as well, should there not be already IDS type sensors that are deployed in the environment. And of course, our unique integration with Grid360 is very informative because it donates a lot of meaningful information about the client environment that traditionally you would not be able to get through different types of products out there. Now, this informs the analysis, the correlation layers, and provides us with some deep information about what's happening within the OT environment and the modelizing that's already happening at that layer. Finally, I would touch on a couple of outliers. I would talk about the type of professional services that we typically see within our client organizations. We see a strong need for assessments. The quest for information is what I like to call it. There's an old saying in security that you can't protect what you don't know. So if you're not aware of the things that exist in your environment, the different assets, the risks that are attached to them, the vulnerabilities, it's very difficult to create a defensive posture around this. And we want to support, defense in depth modeling, but we also want to be able to make sure that our end user organizations we work with leverage all of the investments that they've made in securing their environments. And therefore, it's important to assess how all these components are properly configured and how they're reacting against posture assessment. So we can do several types of different assessments, and I would invite you to communicate with Resource Innovations or ourselves should you want to have a detailed list of all the assessments that are possible. We do red teaming exercises, covert black box to more open. We also allow for shadowing during this process, and we do regularly penetration testing. Now, I do want to mention something here. Our expertise is industrial native. We don't do traditional IT. We're really focused on the industrial side of the house. This is where our skill set is. This is where our people come from. All of the practitioners that we have in the environment within Artoria are all focused on industrial cybersecurity. Finally, we provide incident response services if they are needed. We can also provide threat hunting services as required. We can augment as well as teach and train. This is part of our mindset, and we can deliver this through obviously Resource Innovations. And finally, we can provide more traditional services from a cyber analyst or a CISO for a day, these kinds of services in terms of being part of the long-term planning and program development for securing OT. I want to touch quickly on one of the layers that we haven't really addressed, and that's around providing secure remote access to the environment. So our solution is engineered from the start for multi-site management. It is structured around zero trust access in order to be able to properly secure OT environments. The zero trust model has proven to be very informative as well as very well suited to securing high risk areas within OT organizations. We integrate as well as provide meaningful reporting against access layer and being able to integrate within the RAM Square platform as well to share this information It does provide additional layers of correlation. So if we're able to understand the remote access, the rights, the individuals, role-based access is supported as well. We want to make sure that we provide access to the right assets and only the right assets for the role and responsibility of the individual or the organization that's accessing the environment to do their function, whether that's service, whether that's maintenance, whether it's an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder. And obviously, one of the ways that we came out with this solution was based on an initial requirement that we were asked to audit for one of the clients that we had many years ago to find the best remote access solution out there. And we tested a couple of dozen solutions, and we really focused on some of the higher ones. And we found, unfortunately, many vulnerabilities existed within those solution stacks. That pushed us to start product development and provide a better remote access solution in order to meet the requirements of the client at the time. And this product obviously was born during that way. And now it is the product that we maintain and sell to all client organizations that find themselves needing this aspect. Again, most of our products are modeled against NIST, so it's very important for us to follow best practice in both product development and assessment. We also follow IEC, so we want to make sure that our products meet those requirements as well as far as vendor and coding and development practices are concerned. Couple of examples of the type of details that we can provide around IEC. Unfortunately, I don't have a slide here on NERC CIP, but I do have a slide on NIST 882 in order to provide meaningful information and to show detail around both organization level views, site level views, process level views, or even asset level views. So there's multiple layers that are available within the product in order to show the proper information. And this is where I'm going to pass this back to you, John.
Well, thank you very much, Jay. That was excellent. And as Jay has said, just like Artoria's RAM Squared provides many, many functions for cybersecurity, Grid360 provides many functions for distribution analytics as well. I'll start at the top. These are our fundamental engines that power GE, ABB, and Toshiba's energy management and distribution management system for state estimation, security constrained optimal power flow, contingency analysis, and fault analysis. So we can look at the current operating state of the distribution grid using AMI SCADA information and looking at some of those data and topology errors to clean up that data model. We also look at calculate and display severity and system loading and voltage contingency violations, looking at different outages on conductors and transformers, generating alerts, calculating fault levels, and allowing operators to take meaningful action in real time. On top of that, we throw in any analysis of anything the modern grid can experience, from demand response to distributed generation, solar or wind, distributed energy resources such as energy storage, electric vehicles, microgrids, and really the goal of improving that whole customer engagement and customer experience. So we can look at the current and near-term state of these different influencers, looking at grid interconnection programs, and again, working more directly with customers. The middle band there includes some tools for load profiling, short-term and long-term load and DER forecasting. So we can look at those different load profiles for different assets, generate short-term, meaning days ahead, through long-term, months to years ahead, energy and economic forecasts, including those grid influencers such as demand response, DG, energy storage, electric vehicles, and microgrids. And based on those forecasts, we can generate alerts and we can do dispatching of resources to better manage those grid constraints. We can also provide tools for management of independent grids and microgrids and reliability coordination market operations. So our tools will allow us to bring in multiple independently owned commercial industrial grids, overlay them, and make sure we can serve power in a secure environment in that way. We also look at that capacity calculation, outage planning coordination, and then short-term to mid-term adequacy forecasts. And all of that is underpinned by our advanced security, data quality, and reliability analytics in our partnership with Artoria. We can track, as Jay has pointed out, those critical and most vulnerable assets, look at communication channels, protocols, and encryption, looking at patches and mitigations, ownership of devices, and access and safety. In addition to that, we have tools to look at the underlying data quality of that network model, looking at transformer meter assignment, phase assignment, looking at how those devices and conductors are sized, if they're sized properly, looking at asset health forecasting, energy theft, outage causes and outage prediction, and other data quality and operational factors. So we can take all of that data and then analyze it and provide meaningful information back to operators and planners. Next slide, please, Jay. This slide shows a screenshot of Grid360. So what we've done is we've taken a network model, we've passed that network model and asset information to Artoria RAM squared. They've calculated different risk scores, looking at firmware. So what this is showing is we've selected a device, a Moxa NPort 5100 series, based on Artoria's calculation of the risk score of 3.5. We can then visualize that in a map or schematic environment to allow the user to find these assets and determine how these assets impact overall risk. We also look at cyber alerts based on these devices from looking at firmware perspectives and et cetera. So again, we take this data, pass it to RAM squared to track those critical and vulnerable assets. We look at ownership, access, and safety, looking at patches, mitigations, communication channels, protocols, and encryption. We can track that data over time as well to allow you to really better visualize your risk environment. Next slide, please, Jay. And that concludes our webinar. But a reminder, please, to access your questions through the Q&A box. Upvote the questions that you like by clicking the thumbs up button, and we'll turn it over and answer your questions at this time. Next slide. But I do want to say before we leave, thank you very much for attending the webinar. We've got our email addresses at the bottom for Resource Innovations and OTORIO, and be happy to answer your questions during the Q&A period. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Hey there, Jay. So I've had a few questions come in, and I'll start by saying actually this is being recorded, and you'll all receive links to this recording. And we'll also invite you to our next webinar in our series that will be in January. So a few questions have come in. First of all, what's a typical duration of implementation? And I can answer that from a Grid360 perspective. Grid360 can be set up very quickly, a matter of weeks or months, depending on the environment, whether it's software as a service or on-premise, and also depending on the data required. And that's typically the largest amount of time is to bring in that data, analyze it, and make sure it's properly allocated. Do you want to answer that from a RAM squared perspective, Jay?
Yeah, for sure, John. Thanks so much. Yeah, so it depends, of course, on which components of the platform we're talking about. So if I take Spot, so that the assessment platform itself really is very simple. The data ingestion is based on the configuration that we give it. If we're doing offline assessments, then it's a question of gathering the right information and feeding it to the platform. It can be as simple as a matter of, if we're very well aware of the information that is required, as well as having the proper access and connectivity, it can be set up in a few hours, and we'll start ingesting the data that is being sent to it. If we're talking about more the centralized platform, as well as the larger monitoring use cases for continuous monitoring, typical deployment is typically done in a week for the central site, as well as configurations, integrations. And then it's a question of deploying each site by shipping an appliance for the edge connectivity components. And typically they would be preloaded with the right integrations for that environment specifically. So a lot of what we need is client owned, in the sense of how well they know their environment. We can assist here. Obviously, we've got the discovery tools to accompany them and make that process easier. It is highly variable on the culture, the organization's access to information, as well as the accessibility to the sites, which is always a concern when it comes to OT sites at times. We want to make sure that we follow the guidelines and recommendations and implementation scenarios.
Very good. Now, another one that came in, Jay, you might want to take this one first, is what data is typically required for an implementation?
Yeah, so I know I've touched on this during the presentation. Really, as simply as we want read access information, right? So we want to have read access rights to a number of the components in the environment, so that we have the ability to extract the information that is required. That'll be different from each tech ecosystem that we'll walk into. So for a client, typically we'd want to have access to firewall logs, object files if they're available. We want to have access to configurations. If this can be leveraged through an API that we've developed already, great. If not, we can build one for the platform. I have to say that as an example, for most firewall vendors, IDS vendors, SIM vendors out there, as well as many of the industrial components, those integrations have already been built. Now, depending on the generational mix of the product, there might be some adjustments that are required because not all products are the same and they're not created equal, but that's fine tuning. So typically, if we can get access to that information and adapt it to the context of the utility, and it's a matter of just configuring it properly and it starts ingesting the data.
Very good. Very good. All right. And then the third question came in. How is the software typically hosted? Is it hosted on-premise or cloud?
Yeah, so we support all deployment formats, whether that's on-premise, cloud-based, hybrid. If you want to have some sites being deployed on-premise and others them, and we'll follow the data governance rules as they apply.
Okay. Jay, you broke up a bit. That might have been on my side. I'm not sure. But regardless, I can answer from the Grid360 perspective. We can support cloud-based or on-premise. And we've had some clients install actually in a virtual private cloud as well. So we're agnostic as to that, the method of installation. All right. That's the questions we have. Do you have any closing remarks, Jay?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground, John. Typically, you know, I've been on these before, and now's a good time to ask questions and not be shy around them. We are here for a couple more minutes. Happy to answer any of the questions that anybody wants to throw to our side. But again, this recording will be made available as well as the presentation that accompanies it. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah. And we look forward to answering your questions and seeing you in the next webinar, hopefully scheduled for January.
Correct. Thank you, John.
Yeah, if there are no further questions, we'll adjourn. Say thank you again for attending and have a good rest of your day. Take care.